Go ahead.
Well, for your background.
Is that on? Is the mic on?
Yeah. Okay. Just to give you a moment of background, I had just recently come from a university presidency to my position in the General Assembly, and fresh in my mind was those issues of difficulties in coping with mathematics when they got to campus and other subject matter as well. But I was concerned about that, and the more and more we talked with the committees and people from Department of Ed and others about the issue, I kept saying, I'm troubled by the fact that we have so many young people coming to campus that are not able to succeed in just college algebra. And we had people that responded to me by saying, well, we have to teach the core content we have. And naturally, my first reaction was to stand up, and I'm not going to do that for you here, but I might disarm my microphone if I did that. But I stood up, and I said, I'm going to document for you my perception of our core content in mathematics at that time. And I reached as far as my arms would allow me to reach, and I said, it's that wide, and it's only this deep. And I said, I don't want my children or grandchildren being taught about probability studies and things like that until they have basic fundamentals of math. And so the more we moved from that point to all of a sudden we hear a notification that we're developing national standards in math, English language arts, and others to come we anticipate. So I thought, this is the right time. We put together Senate Bill 1, and the other concern I had is that the testing program, the accountability program we had, did not hold Johnny and Mary. Those are my little generic students, by the way. When I talk about Johnny and Mary, you know who I'm mentioning. Those are not my grandchildren. We realized that under our system we had before, they were not actually held accountable for their own behavior, their own performance. We were evaluating high schools. And I made a comment to several groups that, I know it's important for you to know how, and I looked at the two ends of our state, Paducah-Tillman High School and Pikeville High School, how they're performing and how they compare. But as a university president, that doesn't help me much. I have to know how Johnny and Mary are progressing. So this is the kind of framework that caused me to start. We got to hold a student responsible. We have to have new and improved and narrowed and deeper core content or standards for our program, and then we have to have an assessment and accountability program that documents for us in the legislature. Let me regress to one point that has been made already. The first year that we flew this up the flagpole, we didn't have great acceptance of it. In fact, sometimes I wondered if I was going to get out. And I made sure everybody knew my blood type was O negative, just in case I needed some before the session was over. So it was not readily accepted the first time. So we worked for the next year and making sure that everyone was on board and hopefully was on board. And as it worked out, the next year when we brought it up, obviously they were, or we wouldn't have passed it unanimously, I believe, in both chambers. So we rejoice with that. But one of the, if you don't know how the negotiations go on, but Carl and I and a conference committee from both chambers spent hours and hours and hours, and most of it in the evenings, in late evenings, and middle of the night, and working out details. And one of the sticking things that I knew had to be dealt with, but there was some language placed in that bill that would have mandated collaborative agreement or cooperation between post-secondary ed and K-12. And some of the language that was put in there was just a little bit too punitive for me. It said what they had to do, and if they didn't do it, this is what was going to happen. I said, well, we can't live with that kind of language. So we thought we'd catch someone that's brand new on the scene. And I asked them real late one night if you would agree if we call Bob King, who's just on board, he's an outside view at this point, and let him look at that language. He did that. And then he stayed with us on the day we passed this. We used his language in there that said what we wanted to say without making it so punitive in nature. But one of the great things that's happened, there's so many great things happen because of Senate Bill 1, but the one that's really, really has excited me is the very open, collaborative work between CPE and the Department of Education and the Commissioner and Phil Rogers and the Professional Standards Board. Everyone is working together in a way that I would never have anticipated. I'm privileged to be here and to have been a part of that initiative, and I'll be quiet and let others comment for a moment.
Well, Carl, from your perspective in the House, what were the sticking points that eventually got resolved when Senate Bill 1 was enacted or passed?
Well, it was an interesting process. It was my first year as chair of the Education Committee, and only my third year in the legislature. And I didn't know what the hell I was doing. But it was an interesting negotiation in the conference committee, the House Conference Committee. Now, you have to understand, you're from out of state. The House is controlled by the Democrats, the Senate's controlled by the Republicans. So this was a partisan effort, and it turned out to be a bipartisan effort. But my conference committee was made up of Harry Mobley, who had over 30 years' experience and lots of years as chair of A&R, a very powerful chair of A&R. And the other 5 members of the conference committee were brand new legislators. It was their first term, their first session. But many of those, I think 3 of those were actually either educators or retired educators. So it made for a really interesting negotiation and working relationship. I think most of the Senate Conference Committee were senior members of the Senate, even the minority party had been in the Senate for quite a while. We had new guys and old guys. And I don't mean to call you old.
Yeah.
But from
here we go again.
But from this, Ken and I have developed a great working relationship, and I'm going to hate to see him leave the Senate after this year. He's retiring. But I remember Harry Mobley had a bill as well that dealt with the same kind of thing. It was very detailed, and we got Senate Bill 1 in the House chambers, and we were looking at, we had a choice. We could pass Harry's bill out of the House, and then decide, I guess, which one we would negotiate with, Harry's bill or Senate Bill 1. And so we used Senate Bill 1, but a lot of the language came from Harry's bill, and we were able to negotiate lots of, and it was a very detailed negotiation. I will say that. Elaine Ferris, I'm glad you're here tonight. Ken Drought, who works for the department, was instrumental in helping us with all the assessment work. And I say that, I hate that with all the other people from out of state, I don't want you to take him away from us. He is very talented, and we depended on his advice a great deal. And with that, we're able to draft the language for the assessment piece of it that I think is extremely important and puts us ahead of everybody else. I mean, we're going to be the first to assess the new core content standards. There were several key points. Along the way, we knew it was important to align the core content standards from post-secondary education to K through 12, and it became evident that we don't have to align everything at the post-secondary level. We just have to align the introductory course requirements. But it needs to start there and work its way all the way down to the kindergarten level. And once we started to understand that, a lot of this was, the timing was perfect because of the work going on with nationally with core content standards. And we knew that possibly would work to our advantage as far as timing, that we would be doing work that others in the nation were doing, and we would be right at the front of everything. just in the negotiations, it was amazing. Once we decided that it wasn't really important who got the credit for this, just as long as we got it done. We established a great working relationship. I told all the new members, and this was 2 years worth of experience talking here, but I told the new members on the conference committee that you may be here 30 years and never have an experience quite like this. And probably the highest compliment I received was Harry Mobley told me it was the best conference committee he'd ever been on. And that says a lot because he had been on a lot of conference committees. But it was unique in the way that we came together. Now, our timing was also perfect, as Ken mentioned, that Bob King had just come on board about a month and a half before that, and we had Elaine as an interim commissioner. And right after we finished, in August after the session finished, Terry Holliday came on board, and these two have established a great working relationship as well. And it's the working together is the key to the success of this bill at the legislative level and at the administrative level, and Phil Rogers as well. And all of these people work well together, and they have been able to take what we did as a unit and implement it and make sure that everything was done correctly. So it's been an interesting process, a fun ride, and hopefully we will truly make a difference for education for children in Kentucky with that bill.
Well, Ken?
May I add one thing?
Yes, of course.
When you're talking about the conference committee, I think we should mention one of the key contributors from the Senate side of the House was Senator Dan Kelly, Judge Dan Kelly now, that has had a passion for education for a long, long time, but he was a major contributor to that conference. And in the reference to age or old people, keep in mind that I had only been there 4 years at that time, right. But most of you realize that the wear and tear on a senator is evident here, because if you remember, I was 6'2" and black-headed 8 years ago when I started.
Well, I would add there was one other thing that came into play. As a new chairman of the House Education Committee, I met with all of the different education interest groups, the teachers and the administrators, the school boards, and the higher education community. And throughout those just introductions, really, to get to know each other and to talk about what was important, it became evident that our old assessment system was very outdated and needed to be changed. And my background mostly is in higher education. And so it was a learning experience for me. But as I listened to all the groups, I don't think they knew how much they agreed on these issues that were in Senate Bill 1. But it became evident to me that, they're kind of all on the same page. They just need to understand that they're on the same page. And that helped in the negotiations with the Senate and our willingness to give up on some issues. As you mentioned, Harry Mobley had been a big supporter of CARA and the assessment that went along with that. And so it was easier to let go once we realized all of the education groups were supportive of letting go and doing something different. And it was especially key when I learned that most of those education groups wanted an assessment that was useful for the individual student, to where we could actually take the grade or the score from that test and know where a student is and know what a student needs to help them advance and catch up. And once we learned that, it all kind of fell into place, and it was easier to work through it. And again, it was very detailed conversations and working relationships, but it was a good result.
Well, our legislators, maybe unwittingly, actually modeled for us collaboration. And if there is, it almost sounds trite to use that word, but I have to tell you that whatever success we've had here is largely due to the fact that we have figured out what that word means and have actually operationalized it. I've got a list that Terry and Phil and I put together, my co-conspirators over there, of fairly major events that we can recall along the way. And maybe, Terry, I'll ask you to talk about it, but one was something that had very little to do with adopting the new standards or implementing Senate Bill 1. There was an effort underway in our state, and I suspect in many of yours, to build something called a P20 data warehouse. And a lot of these efforts were being grant funded around the country, and we were one of the states that had been beneficiaries of a grant to do this. And I remember that our good friend Secretary Joe Meyer, who we've introduced to you, but Joe was in the position of kind of being a neutral party who convened Phil and Terry and me to talk about what it was going to take to implement this data warehouse project. Now, this was going on at the very front end. It actually had preceded the adoption of Senate Bill 1, but was kind of bumping along. And Terry, do you want to kind of tell us what you saw when we got into that and what happened from your perspective?